Hey, welcome back to Bridal Sewing Techniques, and today we're going to talk about how to take in a sheer side seam on a bodice. Now, this is for the bodice of a wedding gown that is sheer. You can see the seam allowances of both that princess seam and the side seam, and you can see that the width of those seam allowances are the same. This is a magical little stitch that I'm going to show you that's going to allow you to very quickly bring in the side seam by one size. If you need to bring it in by more than one size, you're probably going to have to alter it the traditional way, get the bride's permission, and cut away the excess seam allowance. But join me to watch this quick little magic stitch. Are you someone who has experience with a mix of sewing but is looking to get into the bridal sewing niche? This channel is for you. Hit subscribe to become a part of the community. You're going to start with anchoring this stitch with a little knot here. So I have a knot on the end of the thread, and then I'm also looping my first stitch back through that knot. And I'm just going to go back and forth with this stitch. Now, the beautiful thing about this stitch is it's quite invisible, and it's also very easily reversed. And as you know, we try to make alterations reversible as often as possible. This is especially great during these times of social distancing and events being postponed. Brides love to have flexibility in their fit. So I'm just going back and forth in this kind of a zigzag pattern. This is traditionally what is called a ladder stitch or a mattress stitch, but you can do this on a bridal gown, as you can see. So my stitches are not going too awfully deep on the outside. If I peek through on the outside, it's only going to be maybe through one little bitty cell wall of a piece of tulle. It's not going to be very much at all. I'm mostly trying to dig down into that seam allowance that is there originally. I'm crossing over this ribbon, and here we're going to give it a tug. You see how it just pulls it right over magically? That ribbon is actually part of the hang loop, and I did not want to change the way that that was rigged in there. It was actually perfect. So I'm knotting this off, and I'm going to flip over to the other side. I'm just going to run my needle straight through and flip the gown. Sometimes we do reconfigure those hang loops. I do have a video on that, but this one was put in perfectly, and it actually does not glow through very well or very much at all. So we're going to keep it. All right, on this side, I'm going to anchor it with another knot. Whenever I change my direction on a thread, I do go ahead and put another knot in there. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do another ladder stitch. This one is not going to be quite as wide though, because the bulk of the side seam has already been pulled over. I'm basically just pulling this tulle overlay, and I'm only going through that top layer of the overlay. I'm not digging down this time through that seam allowance, but I'm just going to pull that overlay over onto that sheer back. Now this whole bodice is sheer, but the front just has an extra layer or two of tulle or an organza. I really can't remember, honestly, from when I filmed this. So we're just going to go back and forth, and you can see the sheerness and appreciate the sheerness of this bodice when I lay it on my dark ironing board cover. I'm going to give it a nice little tug again. And you can see how when I pull that taut, I'm approximating how it's going to look when I press this. So if you give it a gentle stretch with your hands, just kind of making an embroidery hoop with your hands, that's going to approximate what it's going to be like when you press it and put the clapper on it. So I am knotting off the end of that second ladder stitch, and then I'm also kind of following this angle here to go along the top of where the skirt is. Now, before I started this bodice, I did take in that side seam for that skirt by about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to reach in there, and now that the skirt is the same size as the bodice, I'm going to go ahead and stitch those two together. I'm just going to do that real quick. I know that's not part of bringing in that bodice, but it is something that you're probably going to see as you work on this project. So I did want to give you some sense of completion here. So I'm going to sew that up, and then obviously I'm going to close up that vent that I have open in the lining of the skirt that's allowing me access to this area. So here she is, all nice and neat. And you can see that the seam allowance that we have now is the same as the original seam allowance. So there's no extra opacity in there that's causing any trouble. And as you can also tell by the length of this video, you can take this up in about 5 minutes if you're experienced with the stitch. So the first time it might take you a little bit longer, but after you get the hang of it, it's very, very quick alteration. I hope this has helped you. Please take one moment and hit that like button and hit subscribe. Thanks. I know what you're looking for. You've been sewing for years, but you want to get into full-time bridal sewing. But there's something missing. You're missing the backroom secrets, the industry tips and tricks. The tools, the sources, the techniques that give you the speed and the accuracy that the industry demands. You have found it.